A Texan walks into a bar in Ireland and clears his voice to address the crowd of drinkers. He says, "I hear you Irish are damn good drinkers. I'll bet $500 to anybody in here who can drink 10 pints of Guinness back to back." The room is quiet, and no one takes up the Texan's offer. One man even leaves. 30 minutes later, the same gentleman who left shows back up and taps the Texan on the shoulder. "Is your bet still good?" asks the Irishman. The Texan says, "Yes," and asks the bartender to line up 10 pints of Guinness. Immediately, the Irishman tears into the pint glasses, drinking them all back to back. The other patrons cheer as the Texan watches in amazement. The Texan gives the Irishman his money and says, "If you don't mind me asking, where did you go for the past 30 minutes? The Irishman replies, "Oh, I had to go to the pub down the street first to make sure I could do it." So, a man walked into his office with 2 black eyes. His co-workers were concerned and asked him what had happened. The man hesitated before finally confessing, "Well, it all started when I had to run some errands yesterday." He had just finished up at the grocery store and was feeling good about his efficient shopping when he noticed that the button on the fly of his pants had come loose. He tried to fix it himself, but his attempts only made it worse. Feeling embarrassed and not wanting to walk around with his pants undone, he thought of his neighbor across the hall, a married woman who was always willing to lend a hand. He went to her apartment and explained the situation. The woman was happy to help and invited him in. As she was sewing the button back on, they chatted and laughed. The man was starting to relax and forget about his embarrassing situation. But just as the woman was finishing up and leaning forward to cut the thread with her teeth, her husband walked in the door. The teacher was discussing different jobs held by the parents of the students. When she called on little Johnny, she asked, "And what does your father do?" "Oh, he's a magician," replied Johnny. "Really? And what's his best trick?" "His best trick is sawing people in half." "Wonderful!" exclaimed the teacher. "Tell me, are there any more children in your family?" "Yes, ma'am. I have a half-brother and 2 half-sisters." An old couple had been married for 50 years. They were sitting at the breakfast table one morning when the old gentleman said to his wife, "Just think, we've been married for 50 years. "Yeah," she replied, "just think. 50 years ago we were sitting here at this breakfast table together." "I know," the old man said, "but we were probably sitting here in darkness 50 years ago." The wife snickered and said, "Well, Granny, what do you say? Should we strip?" So the two stripped to the buff and sat down at the table. The little old lady said, "You know, honey, my nipples are as hot for you today as they were 50 years ago." "I wouldn't be surprised," replied Gramps. "One is in your coffee and the other one is in your porridge." The judge looks sternly at the ex-wife. "Judge, why do you think you deserve custody of the child?" Ex-wife, "I brought him into this world, so I should have custody of him." Judge, "That is a simple yet good reason." Then the judge looks towards the ex-husband. "Judge, why do you think you deserve custody of the child, sir?" The ex-husband thought long and hard about his response after a brief moment of silence. He replies, "Ex-husband, if I put money into a Pepsi machine and a Pepsi comes out, is it mine or the machine's?" The inventor of the Harley-Davidson motorcycle, Arthur Davidson, died and went to heaven. At the pearly gates, St. Peter told Mr. Davidson, "Since you've been such a good man and your motorcycles have changed the world, your reward is you can hang out with anyone you want in heaven." Mr. Davidson thought about it for a minute and then said, "I want to hang out with God." "Very well," said St. Peter. and took Mr. Davidson to the throne room and introduced him to God. God and Mr. Davidson exchanged greetings. Then Mr. Davidson said to God, "Since you invented women, I'd like to point out a few things." God said, "Okay." "Well," said Mr. Davidson, "professional to professional, you have some major design flaws in your invention." God replied, "I'm listening." Mr. Davidson continued, "There's too much inconsistency in the front-end protrusion. It chatters constantly at high speeds. Most of the rear ends are too soft and have excessive wobble. The intake is placed way too close to the exhaust. And the maintenance costs are outrageous." God ponders all this for a moment. "You may have some good points there. Hold on a minute." God went to his celestial supercomputer, typed in a few words, and waited for the results. The computer whirred and beeped, and eventually it printed out a slip of paper, which God read. God said, "Where it may be true that my invention has flaws." Holding up the slip of paper, God continued, "According to these numbers, it is also true that more men are riding my invention than yours." The Israelites waited anxiously at the foot of the mountain. They knew Moses had had a tough day negotiating with God over the commandments. Finally, an exhausted Moses trudged down the mountain. "I've got some good news and some bad news, folks," he said. "The good news is that I got him down to 10. The bad news is that adultery is still one of them." A man lies completely naked on the beach with a huge sombrero on his dignity and with a sign, "For viewing." BGN 5. A woman passed by. She wondered why the man was hiding behind such a big hat, gave 5 leaves, looked and exclaimed, "Well, he is hanging." And the man replied, "Well, ma'am, if he could work, would he beg?" Elsa, a 97-year-old midwife, finally passed away after a long and happy life. When she arrived at the pearly gates, St. Peter was standing there waiting for her. He said, "Welcome, Elsa. Do you have a last wish before you enter paradise?" "I do," Elsa replied. "I would like to return to Earth for a few minutes, and for once in my life witness a birth where the father is the one who has to endure the pain of having a baby." St. Peter thought this was a reasonable request, so Elsa was sent back to Earth for a short while. She found herself standing in the home of a woman who was just having a baby. While giving birth, the mother seemed to be in no pain whatsoever. The midwife was curious to see how her husband was doing, but was surprised to see him calmly sitting on a chair by an open window, smoking his pipe. "How are you feeling?" "Aren't you in pain?" the midwife asked him. "Oh no, I'm feeling great," the husband replied. "But I think we have to call for an ambulance. Our neighbor John is lying out there on the lawn screaming his head off.